be talking about resilience, and I'm Amita Kundra. I'm a board-certified cardiothoracic anesthesiologist. I practice in New York. I'm going to have these fabulous ladies introduce themselves as well.
Hi, so I'm Amani Jambakar. I'm a cancer surgeon in Houston, Texas, and I guess I'm participating in this talk because I'm in a male-dominated field, and I really had to cultivate resilience to get through.
I'm Pamela Mehta. I'm a board-certified orthopedic surgeon in San Jose, California. I've been in practice for 10 years now, and I have my own private practice. And I think similarly to Amani, I'm in a male-dominated field. Only 6% of orthopedic surgeons are female, and I think that number drops to less than 4% if you're a minority female.
Hi, I'm Sonal Harder, and I am a board-certified academic internist. I work with medical students and residents, and I got into this topic because at one point in my career, I was completely burnt out as a mom, as a wife, as a doctor, and I stumbled upon physician wellness, which led me down to the path of resiliency. And what I realized was resiliency was like the foundation of everything you do and how you survive and bounce back. Since then, I have taken charge of wellness and resiliency programs at my hospital, and I help physicians, nurses, and residents, kind of get through some tough times. So that's my experience in this topic.
Great. That's awesome. Thank you, guys.
So Sonal, can you share a little bit more with us and kind of define resilience for everyone in the audience?
Yeah. So resiliency simply means bouncing back from a tough situation or adverse event, but bouncing back not where you were, but a little bit stronger, a little bit wiser, right? And a little bit kind of better than where you were. And oftentimes, I think challenging times, if we all look at our life, what really made us more resilient were not really the good times, but the bad times. Things where we failed, things where somebody did not accept or somebody rejected you for any reason, a bad relationship, losses. They really make you tough and make you better, humble you. So I do think that resilience is bouncing back, forward, better, wiser, kinder.
Yeah, and on that note, I think each of us have our own definition of resilience because each of us have gone through something different. For me, it's been, professional hurdles that I've overcome, being in a male-dominated specialty, and, recently it's been my infertility journey. So Pam and Sonal, why don't you share what resilience means to you guys? Because I'd love to hear more about it, and I think the audience would like to hear about it too. So Pam, if you'd like to start.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Amita. For me, it starts probably in my first job after residency. I think you're protected as a resident even when you are in a male-dominated field because you're in, for the most part, a large system and a lot of times in academics. And so there are certain rules that the attendings and everybody has to abide by. So I'm not saying that discrimination cannot exist in residency, and we all know that it does, and sexual harassment and things like that. But you do have a system in place where you can go and discuss these issues. Once you get out into real life, real career, real private practice jobs, especially if you're in a male-dominated field, those rules exist, but there isn't a lot to enforce them, to be honest. And so for me, when I was starting out and interviewing for jobs, I was asked point blank, do you plan to have children? When do you plan to have children? How much of a career do you want when you have children? Are you going to go part-time? I was told the department is concerned about a pregnancy. These are all, as we know, illegal questions, but they happen. They do happen. And for me, because at this point, all of us in medicine, especially as a female or a minority, you've just kind of put your head down, worked hard, checked off all the boxes, showed up early, studied, and then, you gain success or you achieve what you were trying to achieve. It's a very simple formula that if you work hard and you study hard, you're going to achieve what you need to. So for me, I approached my career the same way. they're asking me all these questions, but they don't know that I work really hard and that no matter, you know, how many children I have or however much maternity leave I need to take, I'm going to be there busting my butt just like everybody else. So I didn't see all the clues into what was going to be a bad job situation for me. And so ultimately, to make a long story short, and anyone is welcome to message me about the whole story if it inspires them or they need that for what they're going through. I was ultimately pushed out of my job when I was pregnant with my second and into my maternity leave and when I came back. And it was very methodically and systematically done. And so without getting into a lot of details, I had to have attorneys and I had to exit in a way that protected me and the rest of my career. And so at that point, I was kind of at my lowest mentally and also in my career. Like, how did this happen that I had this, what I thought was a perfect job after residency, and it didn't pan out the way I wanted it to be. And now I have 2 young kids. I had a 15-month-old and a newborn. And so I had to really kind of dig deep into myself and try to figure out what it was that I wanted for my life and my career and how I was going to be resilient, how this was not going to knock me down and that I was going to rise above this and I was going to continue my career and also be a devoted, mother and wife and to my parents and my siblings and things like that. Like, how was I going to have a work-life balance and have a fulfilling career? And so for me, that's where resilience played a large role. And you can choose to be angry and upset and bitter and all of those things, but how is that going to serve you? And so for me, it was just, I had to stay true to myself and really kind of push into my work ethic and also just stand up for myself. I don't think I had really done that up until this point. And I had various positions, and then I decided to start my own practice, and I actually named my practice Resilience Orthopedics because I demonstrate a lot of resilience in my life, and in orthopedics, you have to have a lot of resilience also. You know, you're playing a sport, you get injured, and you have to have surgery or you have to heal it in some way, and then you have to get back to where you were at. So that's sort of my story of where I was in my life and career, and it was really, it was a challenging time and what should have been a really happy time in my life, having had 2 children back to back, and was kind of a blur and was really difficult. And so I think I'm still kind of reeling from some of that time period where I didn't get to enjoy, the birth of my children or my young children at that time. And so everything that I do now, I think is geared towards how can I live the most fulfilling life for me? And it doesn't matter what other people think is fulfilling, it's what's fulfilling to me.
That's great. Sonal, why don't you share a little bit more about what resilience means to you?
So I grew up in India. I think, some of you know that. I grew up in India. I grew up in a very loving, overprotective family where expectations from me were very low. My parents basically had big ambitions for me and my sister as far as academics were concerned, and they took care of the rest. So everything was handed to me on platter. It was a very loving, nurturing environment. And I thought, my role was to go to school, get A+ grades, and get into med school, which I did. And right around 22 is when I finished my medical school back in India and got into ophthalmology, to my family's dismay, because they really wanted me to become an internal medicine doctor, but I did not match, but I matched in ophthalmology. And I was in my first year of ophthalmology where as we were navigating through this, getting me married was always something on my parents' radar. So my parents are very forward-thinking when it comes to academia, when it comes to professional careers for women, but very traditional when it comes to marriage and relationships. And around that time, I was arranged married to come to the United States. So I actually came to the U.S., something that I had not planned on. That happened and fell in my lap, and within 3 months of coming here, I recognized that that was probably the biggest mistake of my life. And here I was in a new country. I had no experience in medicine. I had no idea what visa or what what the status was that I was in at the time, and I knew that that was a bad decision and I needed to get out. I had no toolkit at the time. I had no idea how to open an account in the bank. I did not know how to drive. You know, all the things that when you go to a new country, and I did not have a big support system. I had a sister who had moved here around the same time who was fantastic. So for me, that year, as dark as it was, and as lonely as it was, and I had thoughts of going back, and I had thoughts of ending my career. I had thoughts of not wanting to be in medicine or in the US or in India. And it was the darkest year of my life, but that also built me ground up. What I realized in that 1 year was I was capable of doing a lot more things than what I ever gave credit for. So I knew I was good in academia, but I also realized that I could go out and speak to people and find a way to rent an apartment on my own, go to a bank, open an account, and start saving, and so forth. So that was my number one, I think, event or an event in my life that defined and changed the path I was on. It wasn't easy to get out of that relationship. It wasn't easy coming from a culture that's people-pleasing and that always worries about what will people say. I mean, I was the first one to take a step in that direction. Nobody in my entire family on my mom or dad's side had had a failed marriage behind them. So that was a huge step. I think, but what supported me through all that were my parents and my sister. I think they basically were of the belief that you do not deserve to live an unhappy life. And if you choose to be out of this, we have your back. And that's all I needed. And so from that point, my second step was coming to Arizona for my residency, which was huge because that meant I was financially independent and I was able to rent an apartment and I could now survive financially on my own. And number three was when I met my husband, who is not of Indian ethnicity, and that was a little bit of a challenge in itself, but here I am. I'm now well established in Arizona. I could go to planet Mars and create my life all over again. I'm not afraid of failing. I'm not afraid of failing relationships. I think I'm a lot more humble and I'm a lot more grounded when it comes to life and judging people. I think the one thing that taught me about all of this is when you look at someone's story from the outside, you have no idea what battles they have fought, what they have gone through to get to that point. And so the one thing you could do is not judge and be kind, because there's somebody on that other side who has struggled, and behind that smile lies a lot of pain that they have overcome. And to me, that's resiliency. When you are thrown into, look, we don't pick situations. Often situations pick us. And how to navigate skillfully is what resiliency is.
That's great. Thank you.
That was a really powerful story, Sonal. Thank you for sharing with us. So I'm going to turn it to Amita and Amani. So how do you feel that you gain resilience? What's the steps, you know, when you're in certain situations like Sonal described or I described? How do you gain resilience? Either one of you want to start?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, we had talked about this a little bit when we were talking about this chat, and I think that resilience, it's hard, there's like really no steps, there's no perfect order for everybody, there's no guidebook, but I think it comes over time. I think it comes with experience, you know, and I think that the power of social media has helped me, for example, gain a lot of resilience. Mm-hmm. You know, for example, professionally, you know, I feel that being in a male-dominated specialty, I used to have a hard time finding my voice. I had a hard time speaking up for myself. You know, I had a hard time, you know, sometimes I would second guess my decision making. Mm-hmm. And in those environments, it's a matter of life and death, especially in, you know, anesthesiology and cardiac anesthesiology. But that combined with, you know, sometimes, since very male-dominated specialty and being with surgeons who are usually male, who are very vocal, for me, being on social media really helped me find my voice. And I think it was also a way to find mentors, for me to speak with other women in my specialty. And so I think that getting help and talking to people that have been through what you've been through has been really helpful for me. In terms of my infertility journey, a lot of people I've met here is probably because of what I went through, and I was able to kind of find a support system for myself through social media. And it was tough putting myself out there, but I gained so much in return. And I'm blessed that I now have my baby, and not only have I gained the baby, but my daughter, but I've also met incredible people who are now my closest friends, and they understand what I've been through. And it's also helped me understand how to deal with these difficult situations, talking to people about, I had lost my baby, my first baby. I had gone through failed transfers. And for me, being able to speak to someone who understands what I went through gave me a new perspective and allowed me to find a more positive outlook and allowed me to find constructive ways to deal with it. So, I think it's just so important for people to know that whatever you're going through, you're not alone, and there's someone there that understands. And you'd be surprised how many, that someone may have gone through the exact same thing as you. So don't hesitate to speak to someone, And the other thing is, in terms of professionally, I think it's important for us to learn how to speak up for ourselves. And by that, I mean finding your voice. And I think every voice is different. Every person is different. But, that in the work environment, people sometimes feel I've had a lot of girls message me. They're like, I'm an anesthesia resident. How did you find your voice? How did you gain the confidence to speak up? And I think that comes with experience. It comes with finding mentors and people that you respect, that, you would want to emulate some of the qualities that they have. So, I think it still comes down to just speaking to people and don't hesitate to speak up and talk to people that understand.
So I definitely agree with all of your points, Amita. I think that it really is about finding a community and finding support, because people might have had many of the same experiences that you've had, whether it be infertility or being in a male-dominated field, for example. So for me, I was in a male-dominated field in my residency, and I saw 3 female residents ahead of me not make it through because they were essentially pushed out of the residency program. And it was kind of the weak don't survive mentality, even though, what they needed was help earlier on in their journeys, and, they needed someone to kind of advocate for them. And then I did see 2 female residents actually graduate. And that's pretty reflective of general surgery residency programs everywhere. There are far more women who are lost to attrition compared to male residents. For me, I was the only female resident in my graduating class, and there were a lot of things that happened to me that people didn't really take seriously because my male residents didn't have the same complaints. And I'm sure that you guys can all kind of relate to this, but for example, when I was an intern, there was an attending who was about 70 years old. He was a male, and he kept asking me out to dinner. And no one took me seriously. No one thought that was a big deal because, I was the only one with that complaint, and my male co-interns didn't have the same problem. They said, oh, no, he's very friendly, and he's super nice to us. There's no issue here. So I think one thing that I learned from me was to really document everything that happened. And it was any kind of comment that felt off, any microaggression, even if I didn't do anything with that information and didn't end up reporting it to the program director or the chairman or trying to do things, to help that situation, it did make me feel better to kind of acknowledge that this was wrong, that happened, and almost journal it in a sense that this is something that's going on instead of trying to kind of brush it under the rug. I think in male-dominated fields, there's a lot of complaints that women may have that people just want to sweep under the rug, and they want to make women feel less validated for having those complaints. They want to say that, you know, only the tough survive, and if you can't handle the heat, get out of the kitchen, that kind of mentality. And I think that the thing I want to express to all the women that are watching this is that that's just not true of any field. And if you feel that, you know, in Anita's case, if you don't have a voice and you're not able to make decisions that potentially impact patient care, you know, you have people that are treating you unprofessionally at work, whether it's asking you out to dinner, whether it's yelling at you. I've had other male surgeons come and demand a piece of equipment while I'm in the middle of using it and operating, for example. Things like that, like, you should write these things down, document them, and use it as kind of a way to protect yourself. And later on, that evidence may come up when someone else complains, or when you complain again and you've decided that this is just enough, I can't deal with this anymore. And the other thing I would recommend is there's actually an article that we came across in my MBA studies. I have an MBA from IU Kelley School of Business, and I just graduated in May. It's an article from the Harvard Business Review, and it's called "Resilience is not about how you recharge. It's about how you recharge, not about how you endure." So I think there's a misconception that resilience is about, like, a really terrible situation happens in your life. You're in a bad marriage, you're in a bad residency program, you're in a bad practice, you're dealing with infertility, etc. And you should just kind of keep your head down and get through it, and it's going to get better. But the reality is that resilience is about stopping and taking breaks. So, you know, if you can't handle a situation anymore, you need to know when to call it quits and say, like, hey, I need to either speak to somebody to make this situation better, I need to leave this marriage, I need to leave this practice, or, you know, in the case of some women, I need to change or end my, you know, infertility journey because this is just not working for me anymore. I think that if you go into it with the mindset that, like, all I need to do is just get through this and eventually it's going to get better, that's how you end up getting burnt out. And burnout is a problem across pretty much any professional field, and especially for women, because again, like, these complaints that we raise that our male colleagues may not raise are not taken as seriously. And many times we are expected to balance a lot more, both at work and at home, without having any support at work for it whatsoever. So I think that those are kind of the ways that I recommend building resiliency. I would say definitely read this article. Again, it's called "Resilience is not about how you it is about how you recharge, not about how you endure." And I'll put the name into the chat box as well for anyone who would like to read it. And I think it's also about documenting anything that happens to you, especially as a professional woman, that you think shouldn't have happened.
I think that documentation piece is quite, everything you said was important, but that's quite important in that when I saw things that were happening in my practice, in the practice that I was employed at, I just kind of brushed it off. I didn't take the time to really, like you said, stop, reevaluate, think about what was going on and write it down or email it to myself or have a running Word document. I just felt that if I put my head down, I keep enduring, this is going to be fine. And interestingly, with my first pregnancy, I was the third highest volume surgeon in my department. And I was taking call, the 24-hour call that everybody takes, but I was letting up, like double lead, doing hip fractures till 3 in the morning. I didn't want to pass anything off to anybody because I felt I got to show them I can do this while I'm pregnant. And none of it, in the end, none of it mattered because they had their mind up of what they were going to do. They had made their mind up. And so anything that I thought I was enduring wasn't really working. And if I had stopped and thought about it, like what you're saying, and documented some things, I would have been in a much better position to exit out in a way that would have been more beneficial to me. Mm-hmm. I got extremely lucky, and some of that was from the support of my husband and my parents and my in-laws and just kind of the community around me, and I was able to exit pretty gracefully and without a lot, with no damage to me. But I think that had I documented these things, I think it would have been much better. And that doesn't mean you go run off with that document to HR or to higher ups. It just means at least you're writing these things down so that you have them for yourself.
I think especially in a professional environment, objective data counts a lot more than subjective description of what's going on. And this is even true for promotional, when you go and talk to your boss about why you deserve a promotion or a raise, when you do all these things on the side that are not accounted for, right, in your contract. So for me, it's like mentoring students who stop by at any time of the day for a quick 15-minute chat, something that's not planned. I have started documenting those because when you go at the end of the year and talk to your chair or your boss, you can account for all the things you do on top of what your job requires you to do. So that's a great point, Amani.
Yeah, I would agree as well. I mean, even if you're talking to your boss about your frustrations or why this shouldn't be done, I mean, it's helpful to document how many times a situation has occurred in the past month or the past few weeks. I think that the ability to quantify quantify the number of times it happens really brings value to your conversation. So yeah, I highly recommend that. Documentation is so important. And sometimes we're rushed. We're always rushed in medicine. Like we have to get to the next thing. We have to get to the next case. But those 2 minutes of documenting could spare you hours of difficulty in the future. So, just take time to document.
I also want to touch on what you said, Amita, about it sounds like where you were going with meeting and talking to other people, especially on social media, was the community aspect of it.
Yeah.
I know for me and people in positions like Amani, we didn't, and Amani's much younger than me, so maybe now more of a community. But back when I was a med student and resident, there was no social media. I mean, I was still in the Friendster and MySpace generation, so there was no community. I had no female surgical mentors, not one. There wasn't even one on faculty where I trained. So I think part of the thing was I didn't know other people were kind of dealing with what I was dealing with. I mean, I knew it existed. I knew something wasn't right, but I just didn't have a community of people to talk to. So I think a lot of our viewers right now are young South Asian women. Build a community. You have that at your hands now, whether that's in real life, friends, colleagues, but also on social media. Find the people that are doing what you want to do, that are a few years out from where you're at and at the same level that you're at, and build that community so that you have people to talk to and kind of to relate to, and so that you don't feel like you're alone in this. That's a big part of resilience also.
I think it's one of those factors when we were talking about what are your strategies for resiliency? I mean, in theory, it sounds great, but what are the actual actionable things that you can do on a daily basis to make yourself more resilient, right? Because it's not a trait that we are all born with a certain emotional makeup. And as time goes by, based on who you are, what circumstances you go through, that changes. But the good news about resiliency is it's not static. You can actually build it, and you can be mindful about nurturing it as you go through life. And I think all three of you touch upon one of those C's that I talk about, the letter C, and one big one is community. People who are resilient have a community, have their tribe. They connect, they share. I always tell my students who are in difficult times, sharing with the right type of people creates support. Suffering, silence creates some degree of suffering. And so when you find your tribe, share and connect. The other one, I think Amani touched upon this, was commitment. People who are resilient are committed to their purpose and their goals. And they don't give up despite hurdles and obstacles, and they find ways when they are clear about what their purpose in life is. So if the purpose in life is to help people and to be a doctor, or be an orthopedic surgeon, be a cardiothoracic anesthesiologist, and serve community, so no matter what obstacles you face, you find a way to, remind yourself of that purpose, right? So that's one C. One is community or connection. The other C is commitment. Number 3 is control. Resilient people know what they can control and what they need to let go. I think the minute you try to control everything around you or everybody around you, you can feel discouraged and I mean, look at the pandemic. We don't have any control over COVID-19, but we do have control over being responsible in how we all live our lives. So wearing our masks or washing our hands and social distancing and lifting a community virtually is in our control. But when this ends, it's not necessarily in our control. I think the other two C's that is care for self. Care for self essentially means that you're compassionate towards others, but you're also compassionate towards yourself. And care for self is physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. You know, I think I'm guilty of keeping up my workout schedules. I'll work out 5 out of 7 days. But when it comes to keeping up with my emotional self, I don't do such a good job. I remember I started this gratitude journal way back 4 years ago and sort of gave up somewhere in the middle. And then in 2017, when one of my sons was very sick for a long period of time, and I just felt like I had hit dark times again, I needed some form of perspective, an attitude, a little bit of optimism, right? Because the resilient people are optimistic, and optimistic doesn't mean unrealism or unrealistic people. Optimism simply means that you know bad times will end, that bad times have an expiration date, that you learn and you will move forward. So I think those are some of the C's, and I think one last point on that, C also stands for being creative, and I think on social media, it has allowed some of us to connect, create a community, and get creative, allow our creative side to nurture. I think in medicine, oftentimes, no matter how much you love your specialty, it becomes kind of the same thing we do in and out. So what is it that brings you joy outside of medicine or in life? And are you nurturing that? And these are some small things that over time, we sort of start to forget about them, and we forget about how incredibly important they are in keeping our mental, emotional health intact. So painting or cooking or whatever that is, whatever that creative side is, to nurture that and keep that on.
So just to kind of touch on that, I agree with both of your points, Pam and Sonal. I started my Instagram actually as a way of sharing photos from my travels, and I just like taking pictures. And I did that as a medical student, and that really did help me get through my residency. It was the one creative outlet that I had that I really just still had time to do. And if you scroll way back, you can see that I was pretty active with posting those pictures just because it made me feel good. I liked looking at them, I liked being able to share them. And that was something that I could rely on even when everything else was going really terribly. And to kind of hit on your point, when I was going through my residency, which was not very long ago, I mean, it was just like a year and a half ago, I had one female attending throughout my entire residency, and then like 2 more were hired. And we had a lot of difficulty with mentorship or at all. In fact, I would say the female attendings had higher expectations of the female residents because they were thinking like, oh, we went through hell, like, so you guys should go through hell too, and that's how you become resilient. But that's not what resilience is, and that's not how to teach it. And what we really needed is kind of what Amita and Sonal and Pam, all three of you were saying, we needed community. And back then we had kind of banded together the few of us female residents that were left at that point with the female attendings, we would have all been in a much better place emotionally and really to start our careers now. And so I agree that social media is a place where I really found a sense of community and found other female surgeons when I really wasn't exposed to them throughout my entire training. And I think that having that sense of community is so important. And there's a lot of times now when female surgical residents who are in general surgery residencies now will reach out to me, and I'm so glad that they do because I can be that person who's a little bit ahead of them and tell them like, yes, this is going to get better. You will get control, as you're saying, Sonal, of your own life. The bad times are going to end, and to remind them to document because you don't know when this is going to come up later, but always try to protect yourself.
Yeah, just to touch on the points about community, it's funny because when I was at Pinnacle, Pam, I was taking pictures and I was posting them on social media. And one of my colleagues, he's an older colleague, closer to retirement. He saw my post and he's just like, "This is why women live longer." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's because they have a sense of community. They talk to each other about their problems. They try to work through them. And, there's really power in community." And, I wasn't a big believer in social media until I really became involved in it because, now I think men are realizing, like I used to organize meetups with Saya in the city for physician women. And, they would interview people and they were like, "Oh, I know Amita." And they're like, "Really?" And they're like, "How do you know Amita?" And then they'd hear about these meetups that we had. And then my male colleagues, most of my group is mostly male. So they would come up to me and they're like, "Oh, I told so-and-so, I interviewed this female anesthesiologist. I told her you have parties and they're awesome." And I was just like, okay. So I mean, it's really powerful, because it's given a lot of transparency to our specialties. I hope that it's helping to reduce the gender pay gap between women and men. And, I hope it's reduced, I hope that by speaking, we can work through and find, resolutions to the issues that we've been dealing with for so many years.
I think it's really, because when I was touching upon, when I was in residency, not only did I not have any female mentors, nobody thought it was important for the females to just go out to dinner with each other and talk. And so right when I was exiting, we started doing a little of that. I think there was one organized female ortho dinner that our chairman, who actually is a strong supporter of women. We probably had more women in our residency than most orthopedic surgery residencies, but nobody knew what to do to get us together. And so we had like one dinner once a year at the end. And now, I hear about this all the time, the virtual meetups and the real meetups and all of these female-led conferences like Pinnacle. And it's amazing what that community can do to build a fire under you, as that, oh, so-and-so is feeling the same thing I'm feeling and they're experiencing the same thing. How can we get together and brainstorm of how we can, approach this issue or topic? And I think it's just so powerful that really it's just kind of the meeting of our minds. One of the most amazing things for Pinnacle was that it was multi-specialty. In my career at this stage, when am I going to meet someone like Amita? Nowhere, never. She lives across the country in a completely different specialty than me, yet half the issues that we're dealing with are so similar, both in our professional lives and our personal lives in terms of having, dealing with infertility and things like that. So yeah. I think community is everything, especially if you're part of a minority and really looking to connect with people.
And there's actually a study that compares people who have healthy habits but are isolated, and then people who are smokers. And there are bad outcomes amongst people with healthy habits but are isolated compared to smokers. So, and there's another study that says that being isolated is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And so community really, really creates that power. Look at this weekend. I don't know if our attendees know this, but so many of us have never really met in person, but have created a bond because we've supported each other and rooted for each other and share our stories as moms, as wives, as daughters, and as South Asian women, trying to do so many other things. So yes, power to community and tribe.
So kind of what you were talking about, Pam, in my residency, it was the same thing. And I just graduated from residency, and general surgery does have more female applicants and more female residents than ortho does, certainly. But even when I graduated towards the very end, they started to do something where the female residents would just kind of go out to dinner with the female attending and would have some kind of like formal kind of setup. Before that, for the other 4 years of my residency, we didn't have anything like that. And in fact, I would say that the female residents kind of competed with each other and almost put each other down, which is really a common thing that we do see in women across workplaces. And I think that women think that building resilience is about like, oh, I'm going to get through this no matter what. And people don't really think about the community aspect of it. And they don't think about like, oh, if I lift this other woman up with me, like we're both going to be in a better situation. They really think of building resilience as like an individual goal, and it shouldn't be. It should be a shared community goal. And so, you know, what would happen, an example of something that would happen is, for example, there would be a chief resident that would be yelling at me on rounds, that would be saying, why wasn't this done, that done, the other thing? And then I would be kind of trying to control my emotions and not, you know, burst out crying because he was screaming at me and he was, you know, 6 inches from my face and I was really intimidated by what was happening. And then that resident would say, oh, are you going to start crying like so-and-so, like another female resident? Because she cries about everything. And then I would say, oh, no, she cries about everything. I would never start crying like that. And so, like, in that sense, you know, what was I accomplishing there? I put her down and he put her down. And did it build me up at all? No. Did it mean that he stopped screaming at me? No, it didn't do anything. And I think that that's kind of a really common misconception in a lot of like younger South Asian communities. I'm seeing it amongst pre-meds, I'm seeing it amongst med students, is that like in order to be resilient and in order to get to your own goals and to get through and to be the females that succeed, it means that like it's a goal just for me and it's not a goal for the entire community, and that I shouldn't have to worry about any other women but myself. And you know, that's the misconception I had going throughout my residency. And only towards the very end did I realize that, like, had I approached this totally differently, had all of us approached this totally differently, we would have had a much better residency experience than we did.
Amani, how brave of you to share that story. Thank you for doing that, because it's really hard to talk about, like, when we ourselves are in a position where we could have spoken up or done something differently. I mean, I found myself in that position too, where I was like, oh, I can deal with harassment. You know, I'm not a weak person, and just kind of plowed through it, where if you don't speak, then who's going to speak for you when it happens to you? And how is anyone going to realize that there's a community of people this is happening to?
But also, I think, Amani, you demonstrate one of the key things about resilient people, which is insight and self-awareness, right? So looking at a situation and then being fair about how things could be different the next time you encounter the situation. And I think that is actually one of the qualities of people who are resilient. They are able to look at their challenging times of failures or bad outcomes and say, where did I play a part in this? And what do I learn from this? So that's incredible.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think a lot of us learned how to deal with these situations along the way, but I think social media has power in that respect because, for example, like Pam and Amani spoke about these situations where, you know, they were harassed and they didn't know how to react. And, you know, even in my situation, like, you know, I had a day where a surgeon was like fuming at me for no reason. I think because we were starting the case 5 minutes late, was screaming, was like literally throwing scalpels at me in front of everyone in the room. And, you know, I was told to go apologize. And, you know, because of, you know, I was starting late. And, you know, it was like, and now in retrospect, I'm like, wow, I should have spoken out. I would never have done that now, you know. I would have gone up to him and been like, you're being unprofessional, you know, and I would have spoke to him about it. But I think that these are things that like the community helps us in that way because, you know, a lot of us just didn't know how to deal with these situations, you know. So, yeah, I think that there's a lot of power here.
I think I remember this one particular situation where there's a conflict between me and my colleague who's a female superior. So she is several years ahead of me, and I sort of looked up to her and was a little bit intimidated by her. And I remember at one point we had a disagreement about how we were covering our patients, and I was on vacation. I come back and she calls me to her office and very, very unprofessionally yells at me about something that could have been just discussed like two adults, right? I mean, she was under a lot of stress and she kind of lost it in that moment. And I remember I cry. I mean, I cry for everything. And I just, when somebody has a high pitch, I sometimes simply freeze and I cannot really stand up for myself. I walked out of her office without saying a word, without fighting for myself, and without actually standing up for what I believed. I came home and I discussed this with my husband, who basically said, you need to go back to her and talk to her and finish the loop, not just leave it there. And that was my point of discomfort, a conflict, because I've never done that. But what I did that day was I emailed her, asked for an appointment, asked for time, and sat down with her, and with a good eye-to-eye contact, basically called her out. And I said, I want to discuss a conflict and disagreement, but I would not tolerate the way you handled it. I would appreciate it if you talk to me like two grown-up adults, and I'm open to ideas and changing ways. And I know my heart was racing. That was not my style. I often confuse being assertive and standing up for myself with being disrespectful. And those are not the same thing. Standing up for yourself, being assertive, can be done in a professional, respectful way. And there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be ashamed of. And that does not make you any rude or unkind person. So they're completely, and I was so confused for a long time about those two things. But taking those small steps and standing up for what is right, what is fair, what is your hard work, it's the right thing to do in the long run.
So important. And the other thing I'd like to add is just communication. I think, Sonal, you touched up on it. Like, we as women, we tend to kind of just, like, if a situation arises that's uncomfortable, sometimes we'll just brush it underneath the rug and we'll try to move on. But, you know, for example, when I was starting my IVF cycles, I was like talking to my husband. I was like, I don't know what to do because, you know, it's a lot of appointments. I work with a high volume surgeon who I really like to work with. And, you know, I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, how am I going to make my appointments in the middle of the day to get blood draws and get ultrasounds and stuff like that? And, you know, a lot of women I spoke to, they didn't speak to their colleagues about it, but I realized that for me and the dynamic of my group as an anesthesiologist where, you know, I don't have an office where I can just step out and come back in. I talked to them and I was like, listen, this is what I'm doing. I am going through IVF. You know, we've been having trouble having kids. And, you know, I'm going to have to step out sometimes during the day to go make my appointment, but I'll be right back, you know, like, and I was very transparent with them. And they were incredibly supportive of me. I mean, like, when I was pregnant, they were like, oh my God, congratulations. You know, I tried to be as transparent as possible. I was also transparent with the surgeon that I work with because I wanted him to know that, you know, this is why the turnover may be a little slower today because I have to go and get a blood draw in between cases. And, you know, he never questioned anything I did. You know, he never questioned it because he understood. So I think sometimes we as women have a tendency to not communicate, but I think that there is power in just communicating because that's where sometimes there's a disconnect, you know.
I think also creating boundaries, you know, it's so incredibly important to recognize that you don't have to say yes to all the projects and all the opportunities that come your way. I think one thing I've learned about that is, does that align with my goals and with my purpose? And if the answer is no, there's a very respectful, polite way of saying, I'm not the right person for this, but let me give you some names. Those are some lines, some sentences. I have it on my phone. So when I'm in a situation where I have to say no, I'll find a way to do it professionally and respectfully. Creating boundaries protects yourself. It protects your mental, emotional health, and you can reserve that for something that's more important in your life. So I think as women, we often land up taking on a lot more than what we should and what we want to, because we, you know, want to make everybody happy around us.
Yeah, that's so important.
I think
go ahead, Mani.
I think it goes back to your point, Sonal, about how setting boundaries and, you know, and standing up for ourselves is sometimes, like, there's a lot of misconception about that. And I think in the South Asian community, you know, where we're taught to, women are really taught, you know, obey our parents and then obey our husbands, like, there's just a lot of myths about how that's being seen as disrespectful, exactly what you were saying. And I think that, exactly what you're saying, Amita, is that we have to set boundaries, we have to communicate clearly, and we have to realize that, if we're speaking up for ourselves and saying like, no, I can't do this right now, or yes, I need time for this personal thing right now, it's, we're not being disrespectful to our colleagues, like you're saying, Amita, we're being transparent with them. And if we don't do those things, we're actually being disrespectful to ourselves and our time.
And I think the other thing I have learned about, in general, work or personal life, is asking questions and never to assume that someone will not understand your situation. So it goes back to communication. I remember I was renegotiating my contract 6 months ago, and my husband kept saying, you need to find them to pay you for your wellness program. You're doing wellness for all these residents and attending doctors, and you spend so much time and nobody pays you for that. And you've done this for 3 years. And I kept saying, I don't know, that's not in the budget. I don't think they will. And he said, how do you know? You've never spoken about it. And so he said, what's the worst that'll happen? They will say, well, we don't have it in our budget. Then you are where you are. But if they say, oh, sure, I think we should do something about this, then you come out getting reimbursed for all the hard work you do. And guess what? I went and spoke to my chair, who said, wow, you put this much work for 3 years, and yes, it's time for you to be paid or reimbursed for this program. And that's exactly what happened. So never to assume, take that step, create boundaries, go talk to somebody who is in the leadership position and ask for it. It never hurts.